The janitor's dedication caught Barron Trump's eye. What he did next changed everything. The sun had barely begun to rise when Ronald James eased his old, battered sedan into the farthest corner of the Oxbridge Academy parking lot. He always parked in the same spot, just out of the way, as if trying to keep the peeling paint and dented bumper from drawing attention. The engine gave one final sputter before falling silent. Ronald sighed, gripping the steering wheel for a moment. Another day, another chance to make ends meet. He reached for his thermos, giving the dashboard a small, affectionate pat, a silent thank you to the car for holding on one more day before stepping out. The early morning air was cool, the world still wrapped in quiet, save for the distant rumble of a delivery truck and the soft chirping of birds. Oxbridge Academy was just beginning to stir, and Ronald liked it that way. These quiet moments gave him a brief sense of peace before the day's chaos unfolded. As he pushed his well-worn cleaning cart down the empty hallways, he took quiet pride in his work. The floors gleamed under the overhead lights, the result of his careful, steady hands. He knew most people never noticed, but that didn't matter to him. To Ronald, it wasn't about recognition. It was about doing the job right. Every classroom, every hallway, every trash can, he approached them all with the same quiet dedication. To the students, he was simply Mr. James, the janitor, with a kind word or a warm smile. He knew their names, their favorite sports, their quirks. "Morning, Marcus. How's that science project coming along?" "Hey, Jenny, I saw that goal you scored yesterday. Impressive." These small exchanges had become part of his daily rhythm. A way to connect in a role that often felt invisible. But outside of these walls, life wasn't as polished. Ronald had faced more struggles than most could imagine. Growing up in a small Florida town, opportunities had been scarce. Losing his wife to cancer 10 years ago had been the hardest blow of all. Suddenly, he was both mother and father to their 2 children, juggling the roles of provider, caretaker, and protector. He worked long hours, making sacrifices most would never see, just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. His old sedan, with its unpredictable engine and stubborn refusal to start some mornings, was a daily reminder of those sacrifices, but he never let it dampen his spirit. One day at a time. It was the quiet mantra he repeated as he coaxed the car into motion each morning. Despite his own hardships, Ronald never lost sight of what mattered. His children were his world. His dream was to see them succeed in ways he never could. And that dream kept him going, even on the hardest days. But what Ronald didn't realize was that someone had been watching, someone had noticed. One student, in particular, Barron Trump. A watchful eye. Most of the time, Barron was just another student at Oxbridge Academy, reserved, a little shy, always polite. But behind that quiet demeanor was a sharp eye, and an even sharper sense of empathy. Barron noticed things that others missed, and lately he had been watching Mr. James. It started with small observations, the way the janitor greeted everyone with a smile even when he looked exhausted. The careful way he mopped the floors, ensuring every corner was spotless. The moments when he thought no one was watching, like the time he fixed a broken locker handle before the student even had a chance to report it. There was something about Mr. James that stuck with Barron, something that made him want to know more. Ronald had no idea that his quiet dedication was about to set something extraordinary in motion, that a single act of kindness was about to change his life, forever. An unexpected gesture. Barron Trump had always been different from his classmates. While his peers compared luxury vacations, debated the latest fashion trends, or boasted about their family's newest cars, Barron often found himself on the edges observing. It wasn't that he wasn't interested, he was just thoughtful. Raised with the belief that everyone's story mattered, he had learned early on to pay attention, not just to what people said, but to what they did, to the struggles they carried, to the quiet battles no one talked about. And in Mr. James, he saw something remarkable. To most students, the janitor was just another background figure, someone who faded into the fabric of the school. But to Barron, He stood out. Barron saw the way Mr. James arrived before sunrise, his coffee, thermos in hand, his cleaning cart rattling softly as he made his rounds. He saw the care with which he did his job, the way he wiped down desks, polished floors, and made sure everything was just right. And he saw something else, something no one else seemed to notice. Struggle, the exhaustion in Mr. James's movements, the wear in his clothes, the car that barely held together in the parking lot. And one day, Barron decided to do something about it, something that would turn Ronald James's world upside down, something that would prove that sometimes the people who give the most deserve to receive too. What Barron did next would change everything. The moment that changed everything. Ronald James ensured the school felt more like a second home than just a building. His dedication was woven into every freshly mopped floor, every repaired locker, and every kind word exchanged in passing. At first, Barron Trump didn't think much of it. It was just Mr. James doing his job, right? But one afternoon, as Barron waited outside for his ride, something caught his eye. Across the parking lot, Mr. James was hunched over the hood of his old sedan, tools scattered on the pavement. Smoke curled faintly from the engine as he worked tirelessly, his sleeves rolled up, hands smeared with grease. The Florida sun beat down on him, but he didn't stop, not until the car finally sputtered back to life. Barron watched as Mr. James wiped his forehead with a rag, muttered something under his breath, and climbed into the driver's seat. That image stuck with him. And once Barron started paying attention, he saw even more. Questions without answers. The more Barron noticed, the more questions he had. Why was Mr. James driving a car that barely ran? How did he manage to show up every day with the same warm smile, despite what looked like endless struggles? One afternoon, Barron worked up the courage to approach him. He found Mr. James by the lockers, fixing a broken hinge that no one else had even noticed. "Hey, Mr. James," Barron said hesitantly. "Need a hand?" Ronald glanced up, surprised. "Well, hello there, young man," he said with a grin. "I think I've got it, but I appreciate the offer." Barron lingered, watching as he finished the repair. "You're always fixing things," Barron mused after a pause. "Do you ever get tired of it?" Mr. James let out a deep, genuine laugh. "Oh, sure. But someone's got to do it, right? Besides, there's something satisfying about making things work again." That conversation was the first of many. Over time, Barron got to know more about Mr. James, the man behind the mop and toolbox. He learned about his two kids, how his son dreamed of becoming a mechanical engineer and how his daughter wanted to be a teacher. He heard stories about his late wife, the love of his life, and how losing her had shaped him into the man he was today. Ronald never complained, but Barron could hear it in his voice. The quiet exhaustion, the sacrifices he made daily to keep his family afloat. One day, Barron finally asked the question that had been on his mind since that moment in the parking lot. "Mr. James, why don't you get a new car? That one looks like it's ready to give up on you." Ronald chuckled, shaking his head. "A new car, huh? Well, those things cost money, Barron, and money's not something I've got a lot of. Besides, as long as it gets me where I need to go, it's good enough for me." But to Barron, it wasn't good enough. A plan in motion. The more Barron learned about Mr. James, the heavier the weight of his story felt. He wasn't just a janitor. He was a father, a mentor, an unsung hero of the school, someone who quietly poured his heart into everything he did, asking for nothing in return. It didn't sit right with Barron. He knew he couldn't solve all of Ronald's problems. But maybe, just maybe, he could do something to make his life a little easier. That night at dinner, he brought it up with his parents. "You know Mr. James? The janitor at school?" Barron asked, pushing his food around on his plate. His father nodded. "The one who's always smiling? Yeah, I've seen him." Barron set his fork down, his expression serious. "I think we should help him." His mother tilted her head. "Help him how?" Barron hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I want to get him a car. Something reliable, something he doesn't have to fix every weekend just to get to work." His parents exchanged a glance. That's a big gesture, son, his father said carefully. Do you have a plan? Barron's voice was resolute. I'll figure it out. He's done so much for all of us, and I can't just sit by and do nothing. But, as determined as Barron was, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't do this alone. A movement begins. Once the idea took root, Barron couldn't let it go. Every time he saw Mr. James mopping floors or fixing broken lockers, the urgency grew. But this wasn't a simple task. Buying a car wasn't something a teenager could do on a whim. He needed a plan, and more importantly, he needed help. So he went back to his parents. I don't want this to just be from me, he told them, because deep down, Barron knew this wasn't just about buying a car. It was about showing Mr. James that he was seen, that his kindness hadn't gone unnoticed, that in a world where the quietest voices are often overlooked, his mattered. And soon, Barron's idea would grow into something far bigger than he ever imagined, a movement, a moment of gratitude that would change everything. A gift. From the heart-won evening over dinner, Barron explained his vision. It shouldn't just come from me, he said, setting his fork down. Mr. James has touched so many lives here. I think it would mean more if we all pitched in. His father leaned back, nodding thoughtfully. You're right. This isn't just about money. It's about showing him how much he's appreciated. He paused, studying his son. You'll need to get people involved, though. Teachers, students, staff. Are you ready for that? Barron hesitated for only a moment before nodding. I'll do whatever it takes. Rallying the school. The next day, Barron put his plan into motion. He started small, approaching a few trusted classmates at lunch. You know Mr. James, right, the janitor? He asked, testing the waters. Of course, one of his friends said. He's awesome. Why? Barron leaned in, lowering his voice. I want to get him a new car. His is falling apart and he works so hard for all of us. I think it's time we did something for him. At first there was a stunned silence. Then, excitement. That's huge, one friend said. How are we supposed to pull that off? We'll figure it out, Barron replied. I'm not asking for a lot from anyone, just whatever they can give. If we all chip in even a little, it'll add up. Word began to spread. Barron approached teachers, coaches, even the school counselor. Every conversation was met with the same response, enthusiastic support. Mr. James is one of the hardest working people here, one teacher said, slipping Barron a folded bill. $50, count me in. But even with the donations, Barron knew the cost of a new car was steep. That's when his parents stepped in. His father contacted a local car dealership explaining the situation. The dealership manager, touched by the story, made an offer, a brand new red Jeep SUV at a significant discount. We'll cover the rest, his father said. You just focus on making this special for him. The big reveal with the car secured all. Attention turned to the reveal. Barron wanted it to be a moment Mr. James would never forget. After brainstorming with his friends and teachers, they came up with the perfect plan. They would surprise him during the Friday school assembly. Students worked late decorating a giant banner that read, "Thank you, Mr. James." Teachers coordinated behind the scenes, ensuring Mr. James would be at the assembly without suspecting anything. Barron rehearsed his speech late into the night, pacing his room, hoping to find the right words to express just how much Mr. James meant to them all. By Thursday, everything was ready. The Jeep sat hidden behind the gym, freshly washed and gleaming in the sunlight. The banner was hung. The speeches were finalized. All they had to do now was wait. Doubt and anticipation as the big day approached, a nervous energy settled over Barron. What if it doesn't go the way I'm imagining? He asked his mother that evening. She smiled, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Barron, this isn't just about the car. It's about showing him how much he's valued. And that's something no one can misunderstand. A morning like any other, until it wasn't. Friday morning arrived and the air at Oxbridge Academy was electric. Students whispered excitedly in the hallways, careful not to let Mr. James overhear. Even the staff joined in, sharing stories of the quiet ways he had made their lives easier. He once stayed late to help me find a student's lost backpack, one teacher recalled. He didn't have to, but he did it anyway. Meanwhile, outside, Ronald James had no idea what was coming. His morning routine was predictable. He parked his old sedan in its usual spot, far from the entrance, so students and staff could have the closer spaces. As always, the engine wheezed and groaned before finally giving up with a sputtering halt. He sighed, resting his hands on the steering wheel, preparing for another long day. A day that, to him, felt like just another Friday. But for everyone else, it was the day they would change his life forever. A moment to remember, mop buckets to push, floors to polish, classrooms to tidy. Ronald James found comfort in the rhythm of his work. Hard labor had never bothered him. In fact, it was his way of keeping order, even when life outside the school walls felt uncertain. But today was different, even if Ronald didn't know it yet. An unexpected invitation around mid-morning. As Ronald wheeled his cleaning cart down the hallway, the voice of the headmaster crackled through the intercom. "Good morning, students and staff. Please report to the auditorium for a special assembly. We look forward to seeing you all there." Ronald barely registered the announcement. Assemblies at Oxbridge Academy were routine, usually meant for student achievements or upcoming events. Nothing that involved him. He figured he'd use the time to get ahead on some maintenance work while the building was quiet. But then, one of the teachers approached him with a smile. "You should come too, Mr. James. You're going to want to see this." Reluctantly, he followed the flow of students and staff, slipping into a seat at the back of the auditorium, hoping to blend into the crowd. The room buzzed with excitement, though Ronald couldn't quite put his finger on why. A name he didn't expect to hear. The headmaster stepped onto the stage, greeted by thunderous applause. "Today's assembly isn't about academics or announcements," he said. "It's about celebrating a member of our community." Ronald listened with mild curiosity, wondering who the recognition was for. Then, Barron stepped onto the stage. Ronald knew Barron, a quiet, observant student who always greeted him politely in the hallways. He smiled faintly, assuming the boy had won some kind of award. Then Barron began to speak. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "I'm here today because there's someone at this school who deserves recognition. Someone who makes this place better every single day." Ronald shifted in his seat, furrowing his brows. Who could he be talking about? "I'm talking about Mr. James." The room erupted in applause. Ronald froze. His hands gripped the edges of his chair as he stared, completely caught off guard. A life of quiet dedication. Finally acknowledged. Barron smiled, waiting for the cheers to settle before continuing. "Mr. James isn't just our janitor," he said. "He's the guy who shows up every morning to make sure our classrooms are spotless, our hallways are clean, and our school feels like home. He's the one who fixes what's broken, whether it's a locker, a leaky faucet, or even our spirits, when we're having a bad day." The words hit Ronald like a wave. He had always done his job without expecting thanks. Hearing someone acknowledge it so openly, it was overwhelming. Then the lights dimmed. A video began to play on the large screen behind Barron. A tribute to Mr. James. It was a montage of clips and photos. Ronald at work, mopping floors, repairing broken chairs, carrying supplies. Interspersed were interviews with students and staff, each one sharing how much he meant to them. "He always has a smile for you," one student said. "He never complains, even when we make his job harder," another admitted sheepishly. Laughter rippled through the audience, but Ronald couldn't laugh. His throat tightened as he tried to process what was happening. By the time the video ended, the entire auditorium was on its feet, clapping and cheering. Barron stepped forward again. "Mr. James, we know you never ask for anything," he said, his voice unwavering. "But we see you. We see how hard you work, how much you care, and how you give so much of yourself to this school. Today, we want to give something back to you." He gestured toward the side of the stage. The double doors swung open, revealing a gleaming red, Jeep SUV parked under a massive banner that read, "Thank you, Mr. James," a moment he'd never forget. The auditorium exploded with cheers. Ronald's jaw dropped. His mind struggled to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. Barron turned toward him with a warm smile. "Mr. James, this is for you. From all of us." The riser. Spotlight shifted. A teacher gently touched Ronald's shoulder, urging him forward. His legs trembled as he stood. The applause was deafening. As he made his way to the stage, he saw their faces. The students, the teachers, the staff, all beaming, all gathered because they wanted to honor him. When he finally reached the stage, Barron extended the keys. Ronald hesitated for a moment, his hands shaking. Then he took them. A moment of gratitude. Ronald's gaze swept over the crowd, then back to the gleaming red Jeep, before returning to the sea of faces looking up at him with admiration. I don't know what to say," he stammered, his voice barely audible. Over the lingering applause, he wiped at his eyes, his vision blurred by tears. "You didn't have to do this. I just do my job." But as the cheers swelled again, he began to understand. This wasn't just about a car. It was about the lives he had touched. The quiet kindnesses, the unseen moments of care, and the community that had come together to remind him that his efforts had never gone unnoticed. A gift, beyond measure, for what felt like an eternity. Ronald stood frozen on stage, staring at the gleaming red Jeep SUV just a few feet away. The keys sat heavy in his hand, their weight symbolic of something far greater than just a vehicle. The cheers still rang in his ears, but the moment felt surreal, as if time had slowed. He took an unsteady step forward, his fingers brushing the polished surface of the car. The bright red paint gleamed under the stage lights, a stark contrast to the battered sedan he had parked in the far lot that morning. His throat tightened, and when he finally turned back to face the crowd, his eyes shimmered with tears. The auditorium fell silent, every person waiting to hear him speak. Ronald gripped the microphone, his hands trembling. I don't know what to say," he began, his voice thick with emotion. This is more than I could have ever imagined. I don't even know how to thank you." He paused, drawing in a deep breath, his gaze moving across the room. Students, teachers, staff, all looking at him with warmth, admiration, and something deeper. Love. The weight of kindness. "I've always believed," he continued, his voice steadier now, "that kindness isn't something you do for recognition. It's something you do because it's the right thing." He swallowed hard. "I've tried to live my life that way. And to see all of you come together like this, it means more than I can ever put into words." The audience erupted into applause, again. But Ronald raised a hand, signaling he wasn't finished. "You know," he said, his voice quieter now, "when my wife passed away 10 years ago, I didn't think I'd ever feel this kind of joy again." The room stilled. She was my rock, my partner. Losing her left a hole in my heart that I didn't think anything could fill. But I had 2 kids to raise, and I knew I had to keep going. For them. His voice faltered for a moment, but he pressed on. "Every morning when I wake up, I think about them. They're the reason I do what I do, why I work so hard. I want them to see that no matter what life throws at you, you keep pushing forward. You keep giving, even when you don't have much to give." His fingers curled around the keys in his hand. "And now, because of all of you, because of this incredible gift, I can give them a little more." His voice wavered, raw with emotion. "I can get to work without worrying if my car will break down. I can take my daughter to her dance recital without wondering if we'll make it there." He exhaled shakily, blinking against the tears threatening to fall. "This isn't just a car. It's a blessing. One that will change our lives in ways you can't imagine." A hug that said everything. Tears streamed down his face, and as he looked out into the audience, he saw others wiping their eyes too. Ronald turned to Barron, his voice soft but filled with gratitude. "Barron, I don't know how you thought of this, but you did something extraordinary. You saw me. You saw the work I do. And you cared enough to make this happen. His breath hitched. That means more than I can ever say. And then, he pulled the boy into a tight, heartfelt hug. The auditorium exploded in applause. When they finally pulled apart, Ronald turned back to the microphone one last time. To everyone who made this possible, students, teachers, parents, you've reminded me of something I almost forgot. He smiled through the tears. That no matter how tough life gets, there's always good in the world. There are always people who care. The heart of a community. The headmaster stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Ronald's shoulder. Mr. James, this school is lucky to have you. You're not just part of this community, you're the heart of it. And today we're all here to celebrate you. The cheers were deafening. Students stood on their chairs, clapping, cheering, some even chanting his name. Teachers dabbed at their eyes, shaking their heads in admiration. Ronald looked out at them all, his heart swelling with a gratitude so profound it felt almost unreal. For years he had worked quietly, believing his efforts went unnoticed. But today, standing on that stage, surrounded by the people whose lives he had touched, he realized just how much he had mattered all along. A legacy of kindness. As the assembly ended, students eagerly approached the stage, each wanting a moment with Mr. James. Some shook his hand, others wrapped him in warm hugs, and a few simply said, "Thank you, Mr. James," before hurrying off. Their cheeks flushed with emotion. Through it all, his children stood by his side, their eyes glowing with pride. "Dad, you deserve this," his son said, throwing an arm around him. Ronald pulled him close, still overwhelmed by the moment. A new beginning later, as the crowd began to disperse, Ronald took a quiet moment to sit behind the wheel of the Jeep SUV. He ran his hands over the steering wheel, marveling at how solid and smooth it felt. A car that didn't rattle, groan, or feel like it might fall apart at any moment. His daughter climbed into the passenger seat, her laughter filling the cabin as she explored the car's features. "This is amazing, Dad," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's like a dream." Ronald smiled, feeling the weight of years of struggle begin to lift. "It is," he said quietly, "and it's all because of them." But as he drove out of the parking lot later that day, he realized something. The car was just the beginning. The real gift was the reminder that his work, his kindness, and his sacrifices had never been in vain. The impact of small acts, even as students poured out of the auditorium, many lingered, waiting for a chance to speak to him. A shy sophomore hesitated before approaching, clutching a small, folded piece of notebook paper. "Mr. James," she said softly, "I just wanted to give you this." Before he could respond, she hurried off into the crowd. Curious, Ronald unfolded the note. "Thank you for always being so kind. There were days I felt invisible, but your smile reminded me that someone saw me. I hope today showed you how much you mean to all of us." He read the message twice, his throat tightening. It wasn't just the car. It wasn't even the applause. It was this, the quiet acknowledgement of the little things, the moments he thought no one noticed. For the first time, in a long time, he felt truly seen. A drive into gratitude that afternoon as he prepared to leave. The red Jeep SUV waited for him in the staff parking lot, a vivid contrast to the tired sedan it replaced. His children climbed into the back seat, giggling as they explored every new feature. "It even smells new," his daughter exclaimed, running her hands along the upholstery. Ronald hesitated before getting in, taking one last look at the school, the place he had dedicated so much of his life to. The day's events replayed in his mind. The cheers, the speeches, Barron's steady voice as he spoke about the impact one person could have. Ronald had spent years cleaning these hallways, working quietly, never expecting recognition. But today, he realized that every act of kindness, no matter how small, leaves a mark. As he drove home, the car hummed smoothly beneath him, a far cry from the sputtering groans he was used to. From the back seat, his son leaned forward, a broad grin on his face. "You know, Dad, this car is awesome. But what's even cooler is that everyone loves you so much. I mean, they really love you. Ronald glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his heart swelling. It's not about being loved, son, he said gently. It's about doing what's right, even when no one's watching. He paused, gripping the wheel as a knowing smile crossed his face. And sometimes when you least expect it, people show you that they were watching all along, a story that spreads. That evening, as the excitement of the day settled, Ronald sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window. The red Jeep sat in the driveway, gleaming even in the dim light. In the living room, his children chatted animatedly about their weekend plans, their laughter filling the house. For the first time in years, he felt a deep, profound peace. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the student's note, reading it once more. And he thought of Barron's speech. It wasn't just about the car, it was about what it symbolized, all the small acts of kindness. Holding a door open, offering a smile, remembering a name. They had mattered more than he had ever realized, and today, the students, the teachers, the parents, they had shown him just how much. The ripple effect of kindness in the days that followed. The story of the assembly spread beyond Oxbridge Academy. Students shared clips of the moment on social media, and soon, the story gained traction online. People from all over commented, shared their own experiences, and celebrated the everyday heroes in their lives. Ronald was stunned by the attention, but more than anything, he was grateful. If his story encouraged even one person to show kindness or gratitude, then it was worth it. Because kindness is contagious. A lesson that lasts. As he reflected on the day, Ronald realized the most valuable lesson wasn't the one he had learned. It was the one the students had demonstrated. Gratitude has the power to transform. It connects people, lifting them in ways that go far beyond material gestures. A simple acknowledgement of someone's hard work, a word of encouragement, a moment of appreciation, those things could change a life. For Ronald, the red Jeep would always be a reminder of the community that had embraced him, not just for what he did, but for who he was. And for the students, the day served as a lesson in the power of recognizing and celebrating the people who make their world better. One small act at a time, the legacy of a smile. As the sun set on that unforgettable day, Ronald sat on the porch with his children, watching them laugh and dream about the future. He smiled, knowing that the best lessons aren't always taught in classrooms. They're lived through moments like these. He exhaled, the weight of the day settling in his heart like a warm glow. This isn't just about me, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. It's about all of us. Kindness is contagious, and if we keep it going, who knows what it can do. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because as Ronald's story shows us, even the smallest gestures can lead to extraordinary moments. And together, we can create a world where no good deed goes unnoticed. Because kindness isn't just a gift, it's a legacy.